Hi, I'm Carrie and welcome to the Seago Fibers channel. Normally I make knitting podcasts, but today I have a special video where I'll talk about 23 patterns for a hand knit wardrobe. So I have 6 patterns for spring, 5 for summer, 6 for fall, and 6 for winter. And why 23? It's 2023, so it's just based on the year, pretty arbitrary. The idea for this was, okay, if I had a whole wardrobe full of fun knitted things that could span the whole year, what could they be? Or what would I really love for them to be? It's not necessarily like, oh, I need to knit all of these things in one year. Like, I can't do that. That's way too much for me. It was just more like a dream inspiration edit kind of exercise, just to see like, okay, what is my style? What do I generally like to wear? What do I want to make that's also practical? What would just be plain fun? Like all that kind of thing. Just trying to think ways like how and when I would wear certain pieces. And so it was just a really fun exercise to put together. And so that's been pretty nice. I'd recommend it. So I thought I would share my list with you and maybe there'll be some inspiration. So let's get started with spring. So first up for spring, we have Atlantica by Audrey Borrego. And it was originally published in Pom Pom Quarterly issue 34, but now you can buy it separately on Ravelry if you want to. This one screams spring for me because of all the lace and the baubles and things like that. And it just looks very floral and fun and light and bright. And I love the color choice that is up here that the sample was knit in. It just looks so happy and light in spring. And so it's like, okay, that's quintessential spring right there. And it uses sport weight yarn. In this case, it uses 2 strands of Istex Einband held together, and they marled it. And so in this sample, it's 2 colors that are similar to each other, but not the same. And if you go on Ravelry, you can see a different sample that has a more higher contrast marl. But in my opinion, that tends to lose the pattern a little bit. So if I were to knit this, I'd probably pick 2 similar colors. It is knit bottom up in the round, and it's kind of a drop shoulder, and it has lace and baubles. I think it would be super fun to knit this for next spring, when there's like tulip festivals happening and various garden stuff, and because right now I'm already transitioning into summer, so I'll save that for next year and maybe get started on it in the depths of winter when I'm ready for more color and signs of life. I think it would be a very encouraging knit in that kind of situation. Next we have Tulip by Melody Hoffmann, and this pattern has been around for a bit and knit by a whole variety of people, but I have not knitted it yet, and I really want to. And it's your basic top-down raglan, but what's so special about it is the scallop hem on the bottom, and I've never done that before, and I would really love to. And another first for me that I've not done before is knitting with unspun yarn, and I would love to try that. So whether it's Plutalopi, Manchalopi, or Nutidin, any of those, I just would love to try it and see what it's like. I think this pattern is very suited for it, and I think when I knit this, I definitely want to use unspun of some sort. I think that would be just a really fun experiment and way to try something new. And the yarn weight for this I find a little bit confusing, probably because it was designed with unspun yarn. She calls it sport, and where it's like 3 strands of lace weight yarn held together. We'll see. But the gauge is 17 stitches per 4 inches, which is pretty big. And you use bigger needles like 4mm and 5mm. So in my mind, like that's definitely not the needles you would use for sport weight yarn. So probably take some swatching. And she also held the unspun yarn together with like a lace weight mohair or a lace weight suri for strength. And I think that would be a really good idea, and also make it floofier, and you could also like do like somewhat different colors that way, which would be pretty. And I'm not typically a cropped sweater kind of girl, but I really like the look of this one cropped, so I'd probably go that way. Then we have a sweater that I call the perfect balloon sweater, and it just looks like the coziest thing to wear around the house. It's light and fluffy and soft, and I love the two colors that she used together. So this is the Early Morning Sweater by Knitflitter, and it's not available on Ravelry as far as I know, but you can get it from her website, which is knitflitter.myshopify.com. I'll put it below. But I love this designer. I think she has such great designs, but they also fit really nicely, and yeah, I'm just a big fan of this designer. So it's top down in the round raglan, but it uses a compound raglan for a really nice fit, and it looks like it would be really fun. And it's a DK worsted kind of weight and 20 stitches per 4 inches. And again, this designer used 2 strands held together. She used a sport weight alpaca silk and a lace weight mohair. I think it looks so comfy and relaxed and cozy, but without being too oversized to where it would get in your way. Then we have a really pretty light and lacy sweater, and this one is from Sandnes Garn. It's the Juvelgenser by Anita Brathetland. It's a bulky weight gauge with 16 stitches per 4 inches, and it uses 5mm needles. It's bottom up in the round, it's a raglan, and it's lace, but it's only in Norwegian. However, it's free, and so I'll include the link below, and it's actually part of the whole catalog that's free. Granted, it is all in Norwegian, but we do have Google Translate, and so I went ahead and downloaded it and plugged the information or the text into Google Translate, and it was enough for me to understand the gist of what to do. And so I feel up for trying it. It's knit with 2 lace weight mohairs held together, and it's the bigger version of the Sandnes mohair. So I think it's just Sandnes Garn silk mohair, not Sandnes Garn Tynn silk mohair. So it's the bigger version that comes in 50-gram balls. So I'm not sure if that's being made anymore, but I'm wondering if we could sub it with like a baby Surrey lace, because that's generally thicker than your typical silk mohair yarn. So that could be an option. Again, swatching is probably the best way to find out. But I think it's so pretty and fun, and there's lots of other good patterns in that catalog too. Yeah, definitely recommend checking those out. This next sweater for spring is the Set Pullover by Ozetta, and I'm very excited about this one. This is a pattern that I definitely have in my mind looking for yarn for. And I love the V-neck, the fact that it crosses over, that it doesn't have traditional ribbing. It has just like the knitted collar, I guess, for the V, and then it has I-cords on the cuffs and hem. And I think it just looks so like oversized, comfy, fluffy, but still nice. And so, I think it looks wonderful. It's a top-down V-neck drop shoulder sweater with I-cord edges, and it uses DK weight yarn. I really want to make it with some fluffy yarn. She used cashmere, but it's probably out of my range, so I'm going to look for either like a fingering and Surrey or mohair held together, or just a really thicker maybe chain net yarn, or maybe a thicker fluffy yarn of some sort, because I really like the fluff and the coze of this. I think it looks really nice. And if you like the idea of the sweater but aren't into drop shoulder construction, there is a raglan version by Neringa Ruke called the Mohair Weekend Sweater. And it has like a similar V, but it has traditional ribbing on the cuffs and hems, and I think maybe a bit more of a balloon sleeve. And the last sweater for spring is a really nice transitional piece, I think. And one thing I find really fun about this pattern is that it just breaks up the construction a bit. Typically I go for top down in the round sweaters. Now I know some of the ones I already suggested are bottom up, so that's already a change for me. And this one's even more different because it's knit flat and seamed at the end. Now, don't worry, there's like no purling in this pattern as far as I can tell. It's entirely garter stitch. It's called Ret Nem by Elsebeth Judith. And let's see, the yarn weight is light fingering. And so you get a lot of yardage with those skeins, so you probably don't need that many of them, which is nice. And the gauge is 22 stitches per 4 inches using 3.5mm needles. And it's top down, flat, drop shoulder, and seamed. And so there is shaping around the neckline so that it fits really nicely. And aside from the seaming, this is really a no fuss kind of sweater. You don't even have to pick up stitches for the neckline or anything. It's just, there's no like collar. You don't have to do anything special for the collar or the hems. It's just completely garter stitch. What I like about this one is that it's a really thin fabric, and so it's just really light and breezy and perfect for the spring-summer transition. And the first summer pattern I have for you is the Skagen Tee by Vitre Designs. And it is a v-neck tee with longer sleeves and buttons down the front, which are super cute. I would love to make a version of this summer. We'll see if I have time. But yeah, I am definitely a fan. It is knit bottom up, flat, and it has a v-neck. It uses DK weight yarn, and I would use cotton for it, but there's like, you can use whatever you want that you get gauge with. And the pattern recommends to choose bust circumference size that's closest to your actual measurement, as opposed to looking for positive or negative ease. So you want like no ease when you're picking a size, at least according to the Ravelry page. And the next tee is a recent release from PetiteKnit. It's the Poppy tee. And what caught my eye about this one is the really interesting shoulder construction. I don't actually know what you call it. I don't know if it's like set in sleeve or like a unique drop shoulder of some kind. So if you know the name of this kind of shoulder construction, let me know, because I really don't know what it's called. But it has some really cool lines back there. She also used 100% cashmere yarn, but I plan on substituting kind of like a fluffy cotton instead, to make it really nice and summer worthy, because when I used to work in the office, I could pull off like a short sleeve wool sweater for summer because of the air conditioning. But since I'm home now, it's like, okay, bring on all the cotton and the breezy, light, flowy things, because we don't turn the AC on that high. So definitely going for cotton for that. And it just looks really wearable. I really like the longer sleeves, and there's some cool like neck detailing around here and around the hems. And yeah, it's also top down and in the round. So a really nice one for the summer. This next summer pattern is for when you have like a nice summer date, or you're going somewhere fancy, or maybe even for work. It is the Slanting Slip-On by Anne Bensel. I love the lines and the graphic texture of this tank. It is really beautiful. She used a 100% silk, I think, by Lane du Nord Luxury Silk, and it's a DK weight yarn. But I'm kind of wondering if you could hold Knitting for Olive pure silk double and achieve the same gauge. I think if I were to do it, that might be what I do. And this tank actually has negative ease. So when you're picking a size, you want to look for one that is either 8 centimeters or 3 inches smaller than your bust circumference. And now going back to the other side of the spectrum, fancy to casual, we have the Tolsta Tee by Rebecca Clow. And I feel like this one is the star of the summer, because this pattern is very genius. Rebecca from the Crayabea podcast totally like tapped into knitters' hearts everywhere with this pattern, I feel like, because like when she originally came up with this tee, it was just like a plain basic raglan for summer, which is super useful and really nice to have on hand. It uses like a DK weight summer yarn. I think she originally used Drops Bell. It's a great option for that. But you can use pretty much whatever yarn you want. So like basic plain tee, definitely very useful. And then when she created this pattern in conjunction with woolly knit, she decided like, okay, what else can we do with it? Let's promote modifications. And so when you buy the pattern, not only do you get like the basic tee pattern, you also get lots of suggestions and helps on how to modify it. So you can see here. Like, I'll just show a bunch of modification things that her testers did, but there's eyelets and stripes and all sorts of different texture and different kinds of necklines and cuffs and edgings that you can do. It's really nice. And so sometimes we just want, hey, I just want a basic thing that's really simple and mindless. Okay, great, you have it with this pattern. Or if you're feeling more creative and it's like, hey, I want to use this texture, or I want to use these different colors together, or I want to do this thing and just see what happens. It's a very low risk project to do that with because it's pretty small. It has a bigger gauge, and why not? It doesn't take much yarn. It's a really nice pattern to just try different things. And she's also going to update the pattern soon with the fingering weight option. So when it's like a single pattern, that'll have a DK weight gauge and a fingering weight gauge and modification suggestions. And the last pattern we have for this summer is, in my mind, actually a crossover into fall. And so originally the Montpellier top by Anne Fiskum-Sunday is like a summer tee with knit with summer yarn. I think it's been knit with Sandnes Garn Tynn Line, or you can hold Sandnes Garn Line double. So it's a very thick gauge. It's 14 stitches per 4 inches in stockinette, and you use 5.5 and 5 millimeter needles. It's top down in the round, and it doesn't take that much yardage, which is nice. Which is honestly how I found this pattern, because I had some yarn that I was given. It's like, oh, what do I make with this? It's like, oh, I could make this with it. So I actually plan on using Hobby Tweed Delight for this and letting it be like a fuzzy, warm, soft wool vest for fall. And I can wear like long sleeve tees underneath, or even short sleeves for that kind of transitional time. And I think it'll be very cozy. It does have deeper armholes, and so I think if I were to make a summer version of this with summer yarn, I would probably find a way to make those not so deep. But for making a vest version that goes over a shirt, it's actually pretty nice to have those deep armholes. And another thing that really drew me to this pattern was that the edgings and the ribbings along the armholes are not traditional rib. So they're actually like vertical, and it looks really clean, I think. And the lines continue down the side. It looks very sophisticated and put together. Staying on with vests, our first pattern for fall is the Ingeborg Slipover by Fru Brundal. And it uses bulky weight yarn with 14 stitches per 4 inches, and you use 7 and 6 millimeter needles. So it should be pretty quick. What I love about this one are the cables, the ribbing, and the turtleneck. It just is so cozy, and I love how oversized it looks in the pictures. It looks really warm and soft, and yeah, just from looking at the Ravelry page, it looks a little bit tricky to kind of figure out what size to make, because I think how she recommends your size is based on laying the vest flat and measuring from the edge of the ribbing here to the edge of the ribbing here, like still within the armholes and not the actual full circumference of the vest. And so it's like, so I guess you would take a tape measure and kind of measure across here just on one side, and then maybe pick your size based on how much coverage or how wide you want this part to be. That's my guess for how I would pick a size. It looks really cozy, and I would love to knit this fall. Because it's such a heavier weight gauge, I think it would be really interesting to either hold a few strands together, maybe of like scraps or something if there's enough, or I'd have to go out and hunt for some thicker yarn because I'm not as familiar with that, but I think this would be really fun to wear. And one thing I thought about for this fall was sweaters that I really want to wear and would actually wear around, like an everyday kind of sweater at home. And when I saw the Double Date sweater by Winter's Weather Knits, I was like, oh, that is it. It just looks so comfy cozy. I love how big it is, and I love the playing with color. So I'll include photos here of a whole bunch of different testers to give you kind of like color combo ideas. And I'm amazed at how color really shifts the mood of the sweater. And a lot of these are color combos that I wouldn't have thought of, but they look really good. And so it's like, oh, that would be really fun to just kind of try. and there's no stranded color work. You're only ever working with one color at a time. And a fun thing about the sweater is that this one was inspired by a sweater that Rory from Gilmore Girls wore in one of the episodes. So an extra layer of cozy. And so the sample was knit with Julie Aslin and Melange number 1, and it's a merino and yak DK. And so this pattern was knit with just one strand of yarn held together, which makes things easy. And looking for comforting knits for fall, one thing that comes to mind for me is definitely fisherman's rib. And I don't mind knitting fisherman's rib in the round, and I could just do it for a long time. I just think it's just such a comforting kind of knitting, and I could do it forever, which is perfect for the Birch Pullover by Andrea Mowry because it uses such small needles. It uses like US 2 or 2.75 millimeter needles because anyway, just the way fisherman's rib, you have to use smaller needles for it. It uses fingering weight yarn, and it just looks so cozy. There were so many versions in the Ravelry projects of the sweater that I included a bunch here, but it just looks so good in so many different kinds of yarn, whether it's like a really smooth solid color, or if it's tweed, or if it's like a really rustic woolly one. I think if you knit with like a wool cone, like that sort of yarn, I think that could be really cool. And you also have enough yardage for it because it uses a fair bit of yarn too. Like it looks good even with like hand-dyed speckled yarn and slightly variegated yarn. It just seems to look good with everything. And it's a top down in the round raglan, which is also a really nice comforting thing because then you can try it on. And I would, just because of the way that fisherman's rib blocks and grows, I would probably block it before I did the ribbing. That's top tip from Francesca of the Italian Knitting Podcast. Recommend checking her out, but she always blocks her knits before she does the ribbing and the hems and things. And I should have done that with previous whips, but I don't know. Maybe I'll take a page out of her book and do that next time. Another thing I think about for fall is color work. For sure. I actually wish I had like put more color work patterns into this section, but there's just too many patterns. I want to recommend them all. This pattern is called Ilya by Caitlin Hunter, and it's funny because when I saw the like official pattern photos for that one, I was just like, not really loving it. Okay, whatever. But when I saw this version by Madeline of Yama Fiber Art, I was just like, okay, this is it. I have to knit this. Caitlin Hunter designed this in collaboration with Yama Fiber Art. I think there's yarn support or something going on there. But anyway, so this is the Yarn Dyers version, and the colors are spectacular. And I love the cowl neck, and I like how she did like the like surprise color cast on there. And it's like nice and oversized and chunky, and I can just imagine like wearing this like outside in the woods, hiking around, or at a campsite. It just looks super fun and outdoorsy and casual and nice at the same time. Like it just looks really cool. And it uses worsted weight yarn, and the yarn used for both the official sweater and this version is a merino and linen blend. And Madeline of Yama Fiber Art, you can follow her at Yama Fiber Art on Instagram, and I really recommend checking out either her Ravelry page or just her Instagram perhaps, because like her color palette for projects is phenomenal. Like she has such good color taste, and there's lots of neutrals, but also some pops of color too, as you can see in this one. And so I definitely check her out for inspiration. All right, so after all the color work and the textures and the bottom up and all the other things, I think it's time for something easy and comforting, and that means the Novice Sweater by PetiteKnit. Now this sweater is not new, but every time I see it and I see someone wearing it, it's like, oh, I have to knit that. And sometimes in fall, it's just like the perfect time. It's like, I need a comfort knit that's easy and mindless, and I know it's going to fit like a dream. And so I think it's going to be this one. I'm really excited to knit it. And it uses Aran weight yarn, or like a worsted and lace held together, and the gauge is 16 stitches per inch, so it goes pretty fast. It seems like it would. What I love about it is the neck, and it kind of has this like mock neck here. That's not the full turtleneck, but it's more than a crew neck. You can sew it down to make a crew neck, but I really like the mock neck version. And the circular yoke fit, just, it looks really good. And I think it'll fit well, and it has just the right amount of positive ease to be cozy. And it's thick enough to be warm, but not too much. And yeah, so I'm really excited to knit this one. A couple of the yarns recommended if you wanted to use only one at a time and not hold two together are Cumulus Nefnug and Sandnes Garn Tynn. And the last pattern for fall is one that is, again, all about texture. And I love how cozy and interesting this one is. I haven't seen anything like it before. It's the Sharpei Sweater by Anita Brathetland, and it's knit bottom up in the round, and it has a drop shoulder construction. And what's so interesting about this one are all the pleats. So basically you knit for a bit, and then you kind of fold your knitted fabric and knit things together to make this pleat, and then you do it again. You knit for a bit, and then you kind of fold it together and make a pleat, and then you kind of do that for the whole thing. And so it does use a lot of yarn, but I think if you use like thinner weight yarn, and it uses bigger needles, like most of this I think is knit on 5mm, even though it's only holding like a fingering and lace together. I think it creates like a light and airy fabric, even though there's a lot of it. I've seen different versions of this knit in really bright colors, and I think those are so exciting. Those bright colors aren't necessarily fall, so this could easily be like a spring sweater as well. I think white looks really good, and also like hot pink and yellow, and like all those colors are super fun for this. And it's also a really good opportunity to marl if you're holding like three lace weights together, or like a fingering and a lace, and you have like slightly different colors. I think that would look really cool. And our first pattern for winter is one I've actually started. So I'm very excited about this one. It's a current whip, and I'll talk about it on my next podcast. And it is the sweater number 15 by My Favorite Things Knitwear, and I love how Scandi chic it is. Which is pretty much all her stuff. But the oversized, really drapey fabric with the cables just is so cool. And my favorite thing about it is the shoulder detail back here. Again, I don't know what kind of construction this is called. I'm guessing it's drop shoulder, where you kind of make a bit of the back and then pick up stitches and go over to the front and then connect in the round. Is that drop shoulder? Or a version of it? Maybe? I don't know. Let me know. It recommends sport weight yarn, which is what I'm using. The yarn I'm using is Juniper Moon Farm Patagonia, and I highly recommend it. I love it. It blocks out beautifully. And it is so soft. I'm very excited about this one. So I think this one's going to be super cozy for winter. Next up is a really simple v-neck sweater that uses a worsted weight yarn, and it should be nice and cozy and warm. And it is the Basic V by Mini Me Knit Design, and it has a 18.5 stitch gauge using 5mm needles, and it's top down in the round, a raglan and v-neck, and it has like really nice long cuffs, and it just looks really comfy. And so after all that stockinette, I think I'll be ready for some texture again. And this one is the Jenny Sweater by PetiteKnit, and this is one that I've been wanting to make for a long time. It just looks really interesting. I've never done this kind of smocking stitch before. I've heard it's a bit of a process, but I think it's worth it, and it looks really cool. And this one is knit bottom up in the round, and it has a raglan construction. I think a tonal yarn would look really cool with this. Solid colors also look good, and like a subtle marl would also be really pretty if you held like a fingering and a lace weight together, or you can use a DK by itself. The next sweater really struck me the first time I saw it. I love how architectural it is. It's the Robinia Sweater by Anne Wenzel. It is knit top down in the round and has a drop shoulder and a boat neck collar. And the color part, I guess the patterning is stranded color work. And in the sample, the blue section is knit with 3 strands of yarn held together, and the kind of beigey color is knit with just 1 held together, but they're all different weights, so they end up being the same. So I think she held 3 together for the blue, like just to have kind of like a marling interest to the color. But you can do, as long as you get gauge, you can use whatever kind of yarn combo you want. So that part is pretty interesting. For the blue, she held together Essiger Tweed, Davini, and Silk Mohair. And for the beige, she held 1 strand of Essiger EcoSoft, if you're curious. I think I would end up doing like a lot of tests with yarn I already have to kind of see, like, okay, does this gauge work or does that gauge work with different combos, and then figuring out colors after that. There's also a DK weight version of the sweater. It has, and the colorwork pattern is a bit smaller and the cuffs are a bit different. But I really like how big the color patterning is on this one, and I love the sleeves. So it's like, okay, I'll use the bigger weight one. And the last 2 patterns for the year are a couple dresses, because it seems inevitably there's a couple really fun, fancy events that you want to wear something nice to in the winter. And what I don't like about women's fashion a lot is that in order to look nice, you often have to be cold. And so I really want a knit dress. And so I have a couple really nice options for that. The first one is Augustins number 11 by Anne-Sophie Velling. And it's a super bulky gauge. So I'm thinking it could go pretty fast, but who knows? It has like 10 stitches per 4 inches, and it uses 10 millimeter needles. And looking at the Ravelry page, it doesn't list a finished bust circumference. Instead, she says to pick the size based on your actual bust circumference, and there are recommendations based on that, which is unusual, but maybe that'll work. You could probably wing it a little bit trying to do some math. The designer calls this a tunic, so I think what I would end up doing is probably getting more yarn and knitting it longer. It's knit top down in the round, so you can kind of make it however long that you want, which is nice. And so I'd probably make it maybe knee length or just above the knee, and I really love that the skirt is longer in the back. I think that's really cool. And it has I-cord edges and an interesting kind of sleeve pickup with really wide, deep sleeves here. One thing I like about this pattern a lot is the gathering in the skirt. And so you place elastic in here, and hopefully that would help emphasize the like increases or extra fabric in the skirt, kind of make it a little more feminine and provide some shape. I think this dress would be really fun to wear either to like the Nutcracker Ballet or different Christmas parties or various things like that, where it's like a little bit casual but also fun and cute and still really nice, and you can put some fun jewelry with it, and I think that would be a nice look. And this last dress is a recent release, and I don't even think it's on Ravelry. It might be there eventually, but who knows? You can find it on the designer's website at ullanknitwear.com. It's called the Mamba Dress, and what I really like about it is the mix of stockinette and cables. The cabling is just so pretty. I think the overall look is really classic and elegant, and it's also really nice for a cable dress without being too much cables. It's like just enough to be wintry and kind of fancy, but not too much to where it's like overpowering. And this one uses DK weight yarn and has a 24 stitch gauge, and is knit bottom up in the round and has a drop shoulder construction. And the designer offers info for a mini, midi, or maxi length dress, and so you have something to go on when you're like trying to pick yarn and quantities for each of those lengths. So it's nice to have those things to work on. And I also saw like an in progress picture of this on Instagram where the sleeves weren't done yet, but everything else was. And it actually looks really good sleeveless too. So I bet you could have that option as well. All right, so there's 23 patterns for 2023. I hope you found something interesting that you might want to make in the future. And if you have any other knits or suggestions that you're like, oh, you didn't mention this, you should have, I love this one, go ahead and write it in the comments. I'd love to check it out. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for watching, and happy knitting. Bye.